informal gathering. This is a part of Basudha study circle, which began back in the year 2000. That was the beginning of this system. We started with interdisciplinary approach of every topic to be discussed among people from different disciplines, and that's how Center for Interdisciplinary Studies started working among the people from different disciplines, disciplines, with the belief that we need a knowledge commons. The knowledge commons which will be shared by everyone, and the knowledge should be rescued from the clutches of specialists. So there will be no specialization talk, and all of these talks, these kind of Basudha's interdisciplinary discussions, will be free from all jargons, to be shared openly by all people from all disciplines. So therefore, in this the history of this kind of talks, we had history of Europe, the Mahabharata epic, and reconstruction of India's ecological history, third world medicine, politics of population, philosophy of mathematics, and so on and so forth. So we had a wide range of topics. So this, after we had shifted from Bengal 5 years back, for the last 5 years there was no Basudha discussion, this kind of study circle. Until this year, we began with the renewed Basudha study circle with a talk on animal behavior and evolution, and this is the second in this year. We are very fortunate that Professor Leconte has arrived in Kolkata on his way to Basudha, our farm in Odisha. So we took advantage of that. His sojourn just for 2 years in the city. We invited him, and we are very fortunate. So it's very informal, therefore we didn't make any formal announcement. That's why you don't see this kind of panels and festoons around this hall. So fasten your seatbelt and for a very exciting talk. And we welcome this talk for another very important reason, is that it's not just the theoretical physics of nuclear energy, but it's a direct encounter with politics and people's interest. And this is a topic which we know that in Europe there has been a very strong movement against an awareness against nuclear power. But in India and Pakistan there is a resurgence of interest around this, and majority of the people still believe that this is the best opportunity for our energy crisis, solving the energy crisis. It will be a status symbol. In India will be a member of this the nuclear club, and therefore we need this, and so on and so forth. Even among academia, there is a huge number of people, so-called educated people, who believe that this is the most important and most advanced scientific breakthrough. So Professor Leconte will actually discuss, himself being a nuclear physicist. He will deal with those, and I would request our great friend and supporter, Mr. Abhik Saha, without whose sponsorship and holding umbrella of this whole institution, it would have been not possible to hold this kind of work so frequently. And I would have been more listless and more pessimistic about holding any such things in Kolkata. So I would request Abhik Saha to briefly give a kind of vision that we have in Basudha as a member of Basudha also, for other future perspectives, not just nuclear power, our power.
The short truth of the matter is that less and less investment is being made in public knowledge, public interest, and public assets. The simple effort is to try and enthuse people to increase that investment, to bring about awareness that public assets are in effect collective private assets. So when we shut ourselves into our apartments and dive into our television sets, we don't really escape the reality of living in community. It's a momentary untruth that we live when we think that we can be by ourselves. So whether it be Basudha or whether there are so many other institutions, all those who are trying to create public property need to be encouraged. And those like me who have been a little more fortunate than others in being in professions that are, well, sexy professions like law and medicine, who get access to enormous amounts of undeserved money, I think our task is more onerous, and we need to give back all the ill-begotten wealth that we have to ensure that we in our last few years and the next generation gets to a world which is livable. With one short immediate realization that I had as I walked up the stairs today, and Dr. Dev explained to me, I saw a lot of insects which you will see. And I was curious to know what these insects are. And I was told that these are male termites. And this is not the time that they should be flying out of their antennas. They do it after autumn, the period between autumn and winter. But for some reason they are out today, and that should all make us wonder more about important things like where this world is heading to. Thank you so much for this undeserved opportunity to address you. Very respected people who I know personally are sitting here. Please enjoy the talk. Thank you very much.
I'm very happy to speak in a place where knowledge is considered as a common. And yeah. Yes. I'm very pleased to be speaking in a place where knowledge is considered as a common. And as I will speak about nuclear energy, you'll see how much this idea was betrayed by the idea of keeping the knowledge for the power, and not only for everybody, for the mankind. So, before going into the details of nuclear energy, I thought it was useful to start with a little bit of history of what happened in science to describe nature from the point of view of radioactivity. The radioactivity was discovered in 1896. After several years of development of science, the first development of science in Europe, it was started somewhere else before. But the science started with Galilei, more or less. And this happened in the first 17th century. This was essentially mechanics and optics, but that was really developed. And mechanics, especially with Galilei and Newton after. In the 18th century, astonishingly enough, there had been no main discoveries. The scientific people or the cultivated people were just digesting Newton discoveries. It was 100 years for the people to just try to make their mind in coherence with the discovery of Newton. And suddenly, in the end of the 18th century, 19th century, we saw a lot of discovery. And the 19th century was mainly this was a place where optics, where chemistry, where electricity, where heat were developed. All these science were developed at that moment. And at the end of 19th century became a completely new domain of science, which was opened with the discovery of the electron and the discovery of radioactivity. This is just at the end of the 18th century. The electron was discovered in evacuated boxes, and the radioactivity was discovered because they had an effect on the photographic paper, and so that the power of the radioactivity was able to modify the photosensitive paper. Then, after 1896, Becquerel was discovered in radioactivity. 2 years later, Pierre Curie and Marie Curie discovered two new elements, which were very, very radioactive, much more radioactive than uranium. And this was radium and polonium. And they were able, after years, Marie Curie was able to chemically treat tons of uranium ore in order to take out of it radium, a measurable quantity of radium. And this radium had extraordinary properties because in light, if you had some radium in a simply glass bottle, in night it was making light, and so in some evenings Pierre Curie was having this bottle in his pocket and he was showing to everybody. Happily he didn't have to develop a cancer because he died much earlier. So after that we have the discovery of relativity by Einstein, and also the apparition of quantum mechanics just at the end, at the turn of the century, with Planck, who discovered quantum theory, the beginning of quantum theory, and discovered the quanta. And Einstein confirmed this on the photoelectric effect. And after that, an important moment is when Rutherford discovered the nucleus. So this was a very astonishing event because he was just having a kind of gun sending alpha particles on a gold foil, simple gold foil. And he did not do everything himself. He had two students, and they had to measure what come out of the gold foil in a black place, a very small place, and they had to count the flashes that were coming out of the photosensitive material which was around the foil of gold. And they were counting for hours what come from the front way and from the back way. And one of these students was named Geiger. And Geiger suffered so much to be standing so much hours in the black that he invented a way to count automatically the particles. And so that what was discovered at that moment was that the sum of the particles were going from the gun to the foil and backward. And there was few, very few, but a lot of backward. And it was impossible to explain this unless all the weight of the matter was concentrated in a very, very small place. And by making some calculation, they were able to tell that the nucleus was small, so small, that if the atom was the size of a town like Kolkata, then the nucleus was the size of a small football ball. So it was extremely small. And all the weights had to be there. And around were necessary electrons. And that's why Bohr invented the concept of planetary atom, with electrons running around. But this concept of planetary atom was full of contradiction. It was full, but it was not a problem for Bohr, because Bohr used to say, if it's not crazy, it's not true. So this was always, and all the contradiction had to be removed by the help of a definition of what is an object, which is completely different of what we usually consider when we speak about an object. So an electron is not an object as we consider usually. An electron is something which has multiple possibilities, and if you make torture on it, it will give you answer. If you ask you where you are, he will tell you, because he can tell this. But he is not, before you ask the question, he is not in such a state that you have measured. So it's in infinity of states, different states. And so this was a very important discovery, and this led to the quantum mechanics, which is something which I think too few people have really think enough to understand. It's something which is still very unknown, and in the population, I think very few people know about it. So it is this revolution of quantum mechanics which was preparing the description of the nucleus later on. After that, among the discoveries was the discovery of Joliot-Curie, Frédéric Joliot-Curie, married to Irène Curie, who is the daughter of Marie Curie. And Frédéric Joliot-Curie and Irène Curie discovered artificial radioactivity. So something which was not radioactive could be irradiated by some neutron, which Chadwick had discovered in 1934, and he discovered then artificial radioactivity. A nucleus which was bright, which has no activity, could become a radioactive nucleus. Then we have all this preparation, and happened the discovery of the fission of the uranium nucleus. This happened in 1938 in Berlin, and this was done by Otto Hahn and a collaborator, and by Lise Meitner, who was not at that moment in Berlin because she was Jew and she had fled to Denmark. But in Denmark, she made all the calculation, all the reflection about the discovery of the measurement made by Otto Hahn. And she understood that the nucleus had been, when it has swallowed a neutron, had been oscillating very strongly, and at some moment able to be cut in two parts. The proof of it was the fact that they discovered in a sample, which was only uranium, they discovered the apparition of barium. They measured some new nucleus that was not there before. Barium was one of what we call the fission product, an element of the cutting. So we knew at that moment that a neutron was able to provoke the fission of uranium. And at that moment, things accelerate. In 1939, spring, Joliot-Curie did not make a publication, but he made un brevet. A patent. He made a patent. And he said, if when the uranium is broken, if there is enough neutron to come out and provoke the fission of another nucleus, then the reaction could continue. This was called the chain reaction. So they were there, and how many neutrons would come out of the fission? And at that moment, every publication ceased. Almost every publication. Nobody has ever said how many neutrons was necessary. Nobody measured what was the probability of for a neutron to be captured by a nucleus. Nobody knew that. And the war started in September 1939 by the declaration by France and England to Germany, the war. And at that moment there is silence in publication. And in August 1939, Leo Szilard, a Swiss scientist, wrote a letter that he brought to Einstein, telling Einstein, could you sign this letter and send it to Roosevelt, the president of the USA? He said, if I write it, it will never reach Roosevelt. But if Einstein writes it, it will reach. And in this letter, he was telling that there was a possibility, as was written in the patent of radioactive, of explosive reaction. And that could be making an enormous power. And as most of the discoveries, the most important discoveries, were made in Berlin, there was a great probability that the German could reach this power. Then Einstein signed the letter, and it was sent to Roosevelt, who read it and started a group of study of this question. After the war, Einstein and Szilard said that they were regretting to have made this letter. this, because it made the world entering into the nuclear era, the era of nuclear power. The things started rather slowly. But in 1942, then Roosevelt launched what is called the Manhattan Project. The Manhattan Project started with an enormous amount of money, an enormous amount of people, and an enormous power of secret. It is said, I didn't check it, but it is said that only 12 people in the Manhattan Project knew really about what was done. Only 12 people. They were able to keep the secret with a number of people, around almost 200,000 people working for that, and not knowing what was the real goal of this affair. The amount of money put in it is comparable with the Apollo project. Maybe 1/3 of it. And the number of people is also about 1/3 of it. And they had been realizing a number of discoveries and a number of realizations which is absolutely unthinkable. They were able, in 1942, December 1942, I was just making, but I was just born, sorry. I was just born. They started the first reactor in the world. They call it a pile because it was a pile of uranium, graphite, 6 meters high. They had these sheets of graphite and uranium had a hole in it. And they, in the hole, they were putting a bar of cadmium. And this cadmium has the capacity to swallow neutrons much more than uranium, so that they were able to stop an eventual exploding reaction. And when they were moving, they were adding sheets one after the other. And when they were slowly putting up with the rope the bar of cadmium, they were measuring what was coming, and they had a man with an axe. I don't know how to say axe. An axe. And he was able to cut the rope to have the uranium bar to fall down quickly, because they didn't know if they would be completely burned out and, with an explosion. They couldn't know, and they had they were fortunate, because in the counting of neutrons, there are the neutrons coming directly from the fission, but there are more neutrons coming about a few seconds later and emitted by one of the pieces of the broken uranium fission product. And as they were coming late, the reaction could not be as fast as it could have been if there were the all fast neutron coming out from the beginning of the reaction. So they had a natural protection. It was a great fortune for them. And so that they made the first reactor working. It was not the first reactor working in the world. There had been at least another one, in Africa, which was running for a million years in Oklo. And this was something very astonishing that I quoted because it's important to know that nature had invented before the principle of the nuclear fission. It was a very great concentration of uranium. It was at a time where the uranium was more enriched. There was more fissile uranium in the complete uranium because it was a long time ago. It was 2 billion years ago. And this was coming due to the fact that the uranium was concentrated in a particular part in the ground, and when the water arrived, it was moderating the speed of the neutron. And after that, the uranium, which was very concentrated, was starting to enter into fission and chain reaction. And after a while, it was so hot that the water was put out and it stopped. And it lasted for a million years. And it has been discovered because at this place, the fissile part of the uranium has been consumed, has been used to make this reactor working, and so that it could be understand that there had been a special effect at this place, where every other place known, the ratio between the fissile uranium and the non-fissile uranium is always the same. So you see that it has happened 2 billion years ago, and it happened made by a human being in 1942, 2 December, the 2nd December of 1942. After that, in less than 3 years, the Manhattan Project has been able to produce enough enriched uranium to make the Hiroshima bomb. They have been able to make enough plutonium in 2 reactors, 2 big reactors, in order to make the first bomb, which has been used in New Mexico at Alamo Gordo in the 15th of July 1945, and to have the second bomb in Nagasaki in the 9th of August 1945. So you see, it has been extremely fast. And what was the reason to be so fast? This was the fear of the Nazis. Yeah, there is an absolute relationship between this idea that the Germans would have the bomb and that the world would be under the domination of the Nazis. It was this fear. If you want to understand what is the ratio of the power issued from the fission compared to the ratio of the power issued from a chemical reaction like a powder, gunpowder, you have to have in mind the figure which is the following. Powder, chemical reaction, for each molecule which enter into chemical reaction, you have something about 1 electron or 10 electron volt. Electron volt is a very small unit of energy, very useful for the physicists. 1 to 10. And for the fission of uranium, the amount of power is 200,000 electron volt. So 1 uranium produce 200,000 or 20,000 more energy than any chemical reaction. You understand? This is enormous. So it was also very, very fascinating for the people. And after the figure, I think there was fascination for the capacity to get such an amount of energy. And we have to have this in mind. And in fascination, I find also something like narcissism. Narcissism. You see how strong I am. You see how beautiful I am. And you know the story of Narcissus. But in the end, Narcissus looked at this image into water and finally dropped in it and died. So the mankind has developed a kind of narcissism in respect to nuclear energy. And this is something which can go up to death of mankind. So another point I'd like to put up will come when I see a little bit of the rest of the story. The Soviet people made their first bomb very early after America. I have the date, I'm sure I want to check it. I don't want to make mistakes, but it was very, very early. It was in 1949, 29th of August, the Soviets tested their first fission bomb and started then the first ideas of making power, civil power, with this energy. And this came in 1951 when the first electronuclear reactor in the US started. It was a breeding reactor, 100 kilowatts. And in 1952, the American, on 1st November, made the first explosion of a US hydrogen bomb. So it was exactly 8 years after the first fission bomb. And in 12 August 1953, the Soviets made their first hydrogen bomb, so less than 1 year after. And this was very frightening for the Americans who were thinking that they had at least 10 years before them having made this hydrogen bomb. You should understand that a fission bomb has limited power for some reason, and the hydrogen has no limited power. No limited power. You can do it as big as you want. And there had been a Soviet bomb which was absolutely enormous. But in 1953, 6 months after the first Soviet hydrogen bomb, Dwight Eisenhower launches the project Atom for Peace. He was telling himself, everybody will try to have it. Let's control it. And so that he distributed in all over the world small reactors to have people so that they could make experiments and things like that. And they were selling the fuel, the nuclear fuel. So they had a control on it. And after that, the Americans did not develop very much electronuclear power. And the first electronuclear power plant was done by the Soviets. They coupled to the grid in 1954 a reactor of 5 megawatts. So it was something. It was bigger than any of the air turbine, windmill. It's bigger than any of the windmill. So 5 megawatts. And the second reactor coupled to the grid in the world was in France, in Marcoule, and in Sellafield in the United Kingdom. And they coupled their first nuclear plants. And only in 1957, in Shippingport, the USA made their first nuclear plant, electronuclear plant. Then we had a lot of development. Nuclear was really something as an infinite energy hope. And people were going very quickly. One thing happened in 1957. Joliot-Curie, who was the discoverer of the chain reaction, he had been named chief of the Atomic Energy Commission in France, but he was communist and he was suspected to be dangerous for the power of France, and he was also willing to work into only peaceful development. And the French wanted to make a bomb. So he was thrown away from his position. And he himself, Joliot-Curie, had said the atomic energy for peaceful purpose is a good thing, but there will be a big problem with the waste, 1957. But nobody really tried to hear that. And in this kind of enthusiasm, in this belief in the progress, they said, we will find something to take care. Science will be able to take care of the waste. And this thing has not yet arrived, and I'm very convinced that this will not happen easily. So, the first great event after that was Chernobyl. But it is not said that there had been melting core before. So there was 3 Mile Island in 1970. 97. 3 Mile Island.
79.
79, yes. 79. 3 Mile Island. In France there had been 2 melting, but stopped. After there was Fukushima. So this is the aspect which is accidental, and people are thinking that, oh yes, but if we take more precaution, this shouldn't happen. But there still have a great possibility I have to explain why it is so difficult. The problem is that when something goes wrong, you always have the possibility to stop the chain reaction. It's not a problem. It's very easy. Just drop something that swallows the neutron and the chain reaction stops. But when the bars are in, the chain reaction is stopped. There is inside the reactor an enormous amount of broken nuclei. And these broken nuclei are trying to get a balanced shape. And to get the balanced shape, they emit energy that they still have too much. And this is all the radioactivity problem. But first, it's a thermal problem. Just after the reactor has stopped, you have stopped the production of energy, but you still have in the following hour, a power to evacuate, which is 1/10 of the new nominal power. So you still have a fire which is continuing to, you cannot just send water on it and stop it. It is continuing. And so if you don't cool it, it will melt. It will melt. And when it melts, it comes together, and it can be again starting nuclear reaction, or simply to go through any of the environment and destroy it, and goes into the ground, which happened in Chernobyl. Just have a core in high temperature, more than 1,000 degrees, going down and through the vessel, melting the vessel, melting what is down, and going to the ground. And in Chernobyl, the Russian was trying to make a kind of tunnel under the reactor and trying to cool the ground under the reactor in order to stop spreading of this product. The second thing about these broken nuclei is most of the broken nuclei are emitting their energy very quickly, in seconds, in minutes, in hours, in days. But there are a large amount of them which continue their story and which are decaying very, very slowly. And the finishing of this decay can last about 100,000 years before you consider that it's finished. So when you start a reactor, you start the chain reaction, you are making broken nuclei, you are taking an engagement, a commitment. You have to commit yourself to guarantee that you will keep these nuclei, these broken nuclei, for years and years, for thousands of years, in a separate vessel. You have to guarantee that this will not come back into the biosphere. That's a commitment you have to take. There is no way. So you say you have to confine the reaction product in a vessel which will be strong for thousands of years. Nobody in Earth has ever to have such a commitment. And when I was responsible for a reactor one time, I was responsible for a research reactor, which was very small. I had to deal with the waste. And we used to put the waste, before I was there, in a special place in Marboul where there was an installation even. Oh, thank you very much. And, so we used to do that. And I decided, against my authority, to make a contract with the people of Cogema, who was in charge of FLAG in France, to put them our small waste of a 50 megawatt reactor into the flux of what was coming from the electronuclear reactor in France. Because I said, this will be mixed with so much more amount of waste that if it is safe for them, it will not, I will have put my responsibility under the responsibility of this big manager. But my purpose is to tell that this was a responsibility that the mankind has to support, to take, but which she is not able to prove that she will take. You have to be sure that the technique you use is correct, but you have to be sure that the people who will do the work under the specification will do it correctly. You have to be sure that the scientist who has decided that the quoted vessel is strong, you have to be confident that they have done the work correctly. And my feeling is that this kind of commitment is impossible to take. So this was the reason why, when I had finished my responsibility as the director of this institute, Laue Langevin, I said I want to take care of the waste problem. And I went and asked, I want to work there. And as I was rather known, people were telling, oh no, it's not for you, oh no, it's not for you. And finally I found a place in the Ministry of Research. There I was trying to coordinate the different action of research done into France and to coordinate it with the foreign efforts. And after 1 year of work like that, the Atomic Energy Commission asked me to come back to my place, where I belong to be the director of the research program. I never know whether this was because I could help them doing the work, or if I was too uncontrolled in my work in the ministry. I never know. But when I was back in CEA, I was controlled very strictly. Atomic Energy Commission. I was very closely controlled. So after that, I think I understood why I was in this position. So I told you that because very often people are quoting the risk of accident Fukushima is an example of what could happen. I'm always wondering what will be the next. And I have no doubt of the fact that there will be a next. And there will always have explanation. Something has not been rightly done. But this will happen.
And there were many other accidents which have been suppressed, not been formed. There were many
yes,
other accidents
had
which have never been formed, before and after.
Yeah. And your question reminds me to tell one thing, which is the fact that when the bomb was made, when nuclear energy was opened, a sealing of secret fall over all this, and this has been always there. Even when I was in CA, I had to fight against this police, this politics of secret. And it has never been completely removed. People are always claiming, no, now we are open, but you know. And for example, what about dangers? When in 2001, 11 September, happened in New York, the falling towers, what was done in France? They put on, at the distance of the center of Laue, where wastes are processed in Laue, they put a missile in order to shoot on any plane that could be going onto Laue. And I said at the moment, but if I was a terrorist, I would say, okay, thank you, very beautiful. Now we could just take the missile, turn it to the other side, and send it on Laue. And this is the kind of thing where you pretend you have the control of things, and you don't. And so it is extremely, extremely complicated. And secret is used. For example, who says that in Laue there are not the equivalent of Hiroshima, but there is about 30 times the equivalent of Hiroshima. All the waste coming from the reactor, French reactor, since 40 years. Who says that it is there? And it is, for the majority of it, just under a roof of so it is just 2 millimeters thick roof, and under there is 30 times what was in Hiroshima or in Chernobyl. And if you could just bring something which exploded on this,
Suicide bombing.
yeah, you could destroy it. So it's awful, the danger of this. In Sweden, they have understood that, and they have their waste under 100 meters of granite. Granite. And so they are understanding this. In France, we don't have. So it is extremely dangerous. And in fact, when I tell it to serious people, but some terrorists could know it, and I would be responsible to tell it to people, go there, it's easy. You understand? So sometimes I'm telling, shouldn't tell, but I think I should tell, because we never gain anything by hiding things. You understand? So that's the story I wanted to tell you. We were fascinated by the power that would come. We were just trying not to see the consequences. We were very proud of our power, and we are very, very much we are very much out of control of it. We believe we are in control.